So I'd now like to introduce Professor Viorel Panaite, who's going to speak to us this evening. Professor Panaite is Professor in Islamic Ottoman History and head of the Doctoral School of History at the University of Bucharest. He is also senior researcher at the Institute for Southeast European Studies of the Romanian Academy. He's also an honorary member of the Turkish Academy of Sciences. He has published extensively on Ottoman law of war, peace, treaties, and tributaries. Some of his most known monographs are Ottoman Law of War and Peace, the Ottoman Empire and its tribute pairs from north of the Danube, News in England on the Great Turkish War of 1683 to 1699, and Western Diplomacy, Commerce, and Ottoman Law in the 15th to the 17th centuries. In 2018, he received the Turkish Academy Award for Social Sciences and Humanities in recognition of his work in Ottoman conception of international law, especially the law of war and peace and the capitulations. So welcome, Professor Panaite. I will stop sharing my screen, and if you would like to share your screen. Just how we'd like to run it is that Professor Panaite will speak for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we will have questions and answers. If you'd like to ask a question, you can use the tools of Zoom. So you can use the chat function, you can raise your hand, and if you turn on your video and wave at me, I will recognize you and invite you to put your question in order. I'll read out the chat questions. Meanwhile, during the talk, please mute your microphones. You can feel free to turn off your video, and now I'd like to turn over the screen to Viorel Panaite. Now, would you like to share?
Okay, I'd like to first to thank you for.
There we go.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd like to thank you for this invitation. It was a surprise for me, but I accepted. I'm honored. I would like to say hello to everybody wherever you are, and I hope that you are healthy, and in a few months we can travel around the world. Okay, you see my screen now, entirely screen.
Yes.
Again. Okay. At Bibliothèque Nationale de France, Division Orientale, there is an extensive collection of Turkish manuscripts, and among them there is a manuscript compilation of 278 folio, which includes documents written in Ottoman from the late 16th and early 17th centuries. This manuscript was not incidentally written, like it was happening with many manuscripts, in which an anonymous copyist transcribed documents without existing the chronological substance or form relevance between them. As you see on this folio recto, it's written in French, Mémoire de l'ambassade de Monsieur de Brève en Levant, très curieux et nécessaire à ceux qui sont employés pour le service du roi à la porte ottoman. And the signature is Duriel de Malzer. These two actors are very important for my presentation and for my research. It's about François Savary de Brève, who was ambassador at the Ottoman court, or the Ottoman court, between 1591 and 1605, And he conceived this manuscript as a guidebook for the representative of France in the Ottoman Mediterranean towns and ports. I shall present him and, of course, André Durel de Malzer in my next slides. François Savary de Breve is the central personage of this presentation, and now I can say of my next book based on the manuscript Turk 130. And he was the westernmost engaged diplomat at Istanbul at late 16th and early 17th century. It's known that he was born in about 1560 and died at Paris in April 1628. And between 1585 and 1605, he stayed at Istanbul about 22 years, as he said in one of his writing at this school, first as member of the French embassy and since 1593 as ambassador of France. In September 1592, Savary de Breve received the official instruction from King Henry IV of France to continue the unfulfilled missions of the preceding ambassador, his uncle, in fact, Jacques Savary de Lancôme. After that, he was called resident at the Ottoman court in official letters, but the full ambassador became only in July 1593, when he was appointment, and consequently, beginning with the summer of 1593, the King Henry IV addressed his letter à Monsieur de Breve, gentilhomme de ma chambre, et mon ambassadeur à la porte, excels the Grand Seigneur. That's why sometimes we can find in literature 1591, sometimes 1593, but you know, people who work in diplomacy, there is a hierarchy, and sometimes the ambassador first was a resident only. Spending so long time in Istanbul, Savary de Breve took the advantage of learning very well Ottoman language, and as Venetian Bailo Matteo Zani said in 1593, he was not under the necessity of employing interpreters in his intercourse with the Turk. This quality had an efficient trump in his diplomatic activity at the Ottoman court, especially for his relations with the Ottoman officials. For instance, he could draw up the statements in Ottoman faster than his rivals, such as the English ambassador. In his time was two English ambassadors, Edward Barton and Henry Lellow, and consequently could urge the Ottoman officials to act in the favor of France. Also, he was, according to Venetian reports, in high favor with the Turks. An explanation for these friendly relations was the French ambassador's actions of securing the liberty of Muslim slaves, an activity very appreciated at the Ottoman court. And in the same Venetian reports are indicated some Ottoman dignitaries with whom the French ambassador were in good terms or even intimate relationship, most of them belonging to the religious milieu in Istanbul. And we find some formulas such as emirs and preachers. Mullah of the Mosque of Sultan Suleiman was a person of confidence. The emir, the Mullah of Santa Sofia, who is his intimate, or the secretary of the Sultan, a person of great weight. His diplomatic achievements are emphasized in his biographies written after his death. Of course, he also wrote about them in his autobiography. But here I want to say only the most important four. bringing Marseille under King Henry IV authority. Renewal of Imperial Charter twice in 1597 and 1604, neutralizing the English policy on the protection of non-treaty merchants and limiting the North African piracy and setting free French captives. There is another part of Savary de Breve, part of his activity as Orientalist. He is known more or less as the first publisher of Ottoman texts in Europe, because during his mission as ambassador in Rome, the second mission as ambassador, 1607-1615, he founded a printing house with Arabic letters manufactured at his demand. And when he left Rome in 1615, he brought the Arabic letters to France and tried to found an Oriental printing house at the Lombard College. After Savary de Breve's death in 1628, these Arabic letters were used in the Royal Printing House in Paris. Maybe also it's known better than the manuscript I shall speak. Rare book written in French, Relation des voyages de Monsieur de Breve, which was published in 1628. And very often this book, which is a travel account of his voyages coming back to France in 1604-05, and this book it's sometimes it's considered a writing made by de Breve. And in fact, the real author is Jean-Baptiste Vinot de Bavon, and as I said, the editor Jacques de Castel, both of them being a part of his a group that accompanied Savary de Breve to Istanbul. And anyway, it's known. It's better to know this this text for researching, for complementary sources for this presentation. The second actor who signed the note read by me at above, it's André Durier de Malzer. On the first folio, once again, it's here, this note. So he was the first beneficiary of this manuscript, and actually he received it at Savary de Breve's death in 1628. André Durier de Malzer was a disciple of François Savary de Breve, who dispatched him to Egypt in 1616 in order to study Ottoman and Arabic. He also was appointed consul of France in Egypt for a short period between 1623 and 1626. But André Durier de Malzer, it's known as the first translator of Quran in Western language, first in French, and then retranslated in English, in Dutch, in German. As you see in the first edition, it was published in 1647. Now I shall present the manuscript Turks 130, Turkish 130, and I hope to make me understandable and to make my presentation in a way that I can be understood by you. So first I want to say that until now until now, the known Ottoman sources on the French trade in the Eastern Mediterranean were far more abundant for the time after 1620 than any preceding period. Chronologically, this manuscript put at our disposal a great number of documents issued in a very short period of time. Excepting some imperial letters sent to kings of France before 1595 and certain suggestive documents from the 15th and 16th century, the most important is the Imperial Charter granted to the Genoese of Galata in 1453. The most documents of manuscript Turk were written between 1596 and 1602. Thus, the chronological premise is met, so there is no risk to formulate statement and to come to right conclusion. Speaking about chronology and at advice of my guests, I give two picture here. So, you know, about King Henry IV, all times I shall mention, was the sovereign of France in this period of time. And on the other side, it's Sultan Mehmed III, 1595-1603. And that's why, of course, they wrote each other. They give, they send letters. King Henry IV sent letters to Savary the Brave and vice versa. And of course, Sultan Mehmed III was the author who issued the most part of documents of this manuscript. And because I speak about the documents, so as far as diplomatics diversity is concerned, perhaps no other manuscript meets this criterion so well. It's practically about 250 documents, various in typology, issued by various chancelleries in Istanbul, but also some in Paris and London, such as imperial charters. I have in the brackets the Turkish denomination, imperial letters, imperial monograms, imperial orders, letter of justice, Grand Vizier reports, Grand Mufti's legal opinions, high dignitaries' letters, ambassadorial petition, and some translation of King Henry IV and Queen Elizabeth I letters. I read here diplomatics or diplomatic. This term sometimes is not doesn't know by public scholarly discipline centered on the critical analysis of documents. From a thematic point of view, the manuscript provides us with information on most of the diplomatic, legal, and administrative issues that characterize the condition of French merchants in the Ottoman Mediterranean, implying the powerful and executive relationship between the central authorities in Istanbul and provincial officials. Particularly, these documents offer information on, and I have a list here, Western ambassador and their commercial diplomacy at the Ottoman court, the procedure of granting of new capitulations, legal condition of French merchant and Western non-treaty merchants, commercial navigation and carrying trade, French consul's responsibilities and consulage tax, piracy and captives, prohibited merchandise and tax exemption. The structure of manuscript, considering the order of documents transcription, one can realize that Savary the Brave design was to structure his writing in three sections, which I call diplomatic section or chapter of capitulations, legal sections, chapter of legal opinions, and administrative section, chapter of decrees. Once again, I said these are my title I gave to different sections of the manuscript. And I shall start to speak about every section and, of course, about the documents copied in them. So the first section, it's diplomatic section, and considering capitulation in Turkish ahdname as the main diplomatic base for the condition of French merchants in the Ottoman Empire, Savarido Breve copied firstly the 3 imperial charters with commercial privileges granted in the second half of the 16th century. It's about the capitulation granted by Sultan Selim II to King Charles IX in 1569. Then you see 1681 granted by Sultan Murad III to King Henry III, and finally ahdname granted by Sultan Mehmed III to King Henry IV in 1597. Here is only one folio with a copy, with the copy of the ahdname of 1697. This is a copy, and we know this because on the top there is no tura. This is a tura, no, which should be on a top of a document to be considered original. So this tura belongs to the capitulation of 1612, granted to the Dutch Republic for merchants, their merchants to come in the Ottoman Empire. So I want to say that no original of French capitulation was found up until now, speaking about this 3 capitulation, but I avoid to say are not preserved, because I had a surprise more years ago being in Paris, and to see in a catalog with rare books and documents like Sotheby's, I don't know, but in Paris was a document, an original ahdname who was sold from 17th century and who was bought, you know, by a private collector, and actually no historian quoted that ahdname, that text, as existing between French and Ottomans. That's why now I avoid to say that the documents in original is not preserved, because I'm sure that many originals are preserved in private collections around the world, like picture or sculpture. What I want to emphasize is the famous text of 1536, considered long time as a cornerstone of the capitulary system, was not copied in the manuscript. This proves once again that preserved text never had any validity in law, being only a treaty project between King Francois I of France and Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. On the other hand, the capitulation of 1504 is also missing. That is a supplementary evidence that the manuscript had been finished before 1604 during Francois Savary Breve's stay in Istanbul. But about the last capitulation, 1604, Francois Savary de Breve printed it in a bilingual edition in his typography, you know, with in Arabic script, in Ottoman language, and in French translation. One of my colleagues at Institute, Radu Di Prato, found at Archives Nationales de France a copy after original, which is a very interesting text of this article, of this capitulation. It's not an original, but an original copy. It's something I found also at Division Oriental, this kind of original copy of 1597 capitulation. So, Imperial Charter, or in Turkish ahdname, himayun, was the term used in Ottoman Chancellery until the 19th century for calling all peace agreements by which the Porte regulated its peace relations, alliances, international trade, or the condition of foreigners. Translating the Ottoman text, the Europeans organized their contents by articles or chapters, starting from capitula in Latin, capitoli, capitoli in Italian, chapitre or article in English. Considering that in the Western chancelleries, any document structured by chapters could be called capitulation, the same label was therefore applied to the Ottoman terms ahdname. The ahdname had an obvious unilateral character expressed by the formula I gave and ordered this imperial charter, where I is the Sultan. The Italian, French, or English translation proved the existence of a specific Western view, contrary to the Ottoman one. Accordingly, the capitulation should be considered as bilateral agreements. And here, for instance, there are some translation. You see, capitulation du roi avec le grand seigneur, with le grand seigneur, with the Sultan, not granted by Sultan. Or in another translation, confirmation d'alliance avec le grand seigneur, or les capitulations d'entre les majestés de Henri IV et le sultan Mohammed, the capitulation between Henry IV and the Sultan. Actually, we should say, you know, the capitulation granted by Sultan to the king. Later, the word capitulation was also used to define the system of privileges granted to the foreign merchants in the Ottoman Empire, which was called capitulatory regime or regime of capitulation, or to designate special treaty which regulated the position of foreigners inside the empire. But in 16th, 17th century, I want to say that any peace and commerce treaty granted by Ottoman sultans was translated and should be considered a capitulation. So the system of rights, privileges, and obligations stipulated in capitulation concerns generally traffic and navigation, which means safe access by land and sea, safety of person and property, commerce and taxes, residence and inheritance, consular jurisdiction, and I gave 5 of the most important rights, privileges, and obligation. Commercial privileges granted to Europeans were not isolated or specific to the Muslim states, but they were a collective experience of the Mediterranean area since the 11th and 12th centuries. The Ottomans only took over the existing economic, diplomatic, and legal tradition in the Mediterranean expressed by customs, having given them a full and systematic form. You know, in Western Europe, they codified this custom, Mediterranean custom, in 2 kinds of code laws, sea laws and merchant law. Theoretically, the capitulation offers sufficient guarantees concerning the protection of the Western merchants and the freedom of their commerce in the Ottoman domains. Practically, the stipulation of ahdname, of capitulation, were interpreted by Ottoman local officials in a way which could justify their abuse. In this circumstances, Western ambassador and consul had the mission to determine the Ottoman authorities to observe the capitulation granted to their sovereigns. The second section is the legal one. I want to start it saying that Turkish manuscripts with copies of ahdname granted to European sovereigns could be frequently found in archives and libraries. Astonishing to this manuscript, and one can say this is the only manuscript structured in this manner discovered up to now, is the fact that the above-mentioned chapter of capitulation is continued by a special section of legal opinions, which are called fetva in Turkish, of course with an Arabic one, of Arabic origin. Practically, in this manuscript were copied 22 legal opinions issued in majority by jurists from the Saaduddin family, especially from Mehmed bin Saadeddin, son of the well-known analyst Hoca Saadeddin Effendi, during his first tenure as Grand Mufti, which was called Sheikhul Islam in Turkish, between 1601 and 1603. You know, I should say that fatwa are not dated in text, and that's why we cannot establish exactly the day and the month and the year of their issuing. Most fatwa were issued for the purposes of private cases heard in the Qadi courts. Specific to this manuscript is that the legal opinions were deliberately included by Savary de Breve after the diplomatic section of his guidebook to explain and legitimate, from the point of view of Islamic Ottoman law, the commercial privileges and the legal condition of French merchants as they were stipulated in the ahdname granted by Sultan Mehmed III to King Henry IV in February 1597. So it's a directed connection between capitulation granted in 1597 in February and the legal opinion granted by the Grand Mufti. Here a list, of course I don't read, the list of the signature of 22 legal opinions transcribed in this manuscript. And have you seen 15 of them are signed by Mehmed Effendi or Mehmed bin Saadeddin, as I said. 4 were signed by his father, Hoca Saadeddin Effendi. So it's connected with this legal section, the term mustamin. I draw here, and I want to say what this draw shows us. According to Islamic holy law, to enter the abode of Islam, any inhabitant of the abode of war or the house of war, it's Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb, had to be granted a temporary safe conduct, which is called aman. In the Ottoman Chancery, any peace agreement implied a general aman. That means a permission for access and guarantee of safety. Western merchants entering and staying in Ottoman dominions would be called beneficiaries of protection with the Arabic term mustamin. In 2 legal opinions of this manuscript, we find a term mustaminlik, which is a Turkified of Arabic term mustamin, and this term was used to define the legal condition of Western merchants during their stay in the Ottoman dominions. Both of them are signed, both legal opinions are signed by the Sheikh al-Islam Mehmed bin Saadeddin Effendi, as I said. So I show here these 2 cases. This on the right side of my display, it's a legal opinion, has 2 parts, usually a question, mesele, and an answer, el-jawab, and somewhere here, it's the signature of the Shaykh al-Islam or a mufti who gave this fatwa. So this legal opinion deals with the French carrying trade in the Mediterranean, explaining the legal position of the French ships, merchant and sailor who loaded and carried Harbi merchandise between 2 Harbi countries. Harbi is the name given to anything which belongs to the house of war. That means inhabitants, merchandise, ships, everything who came and enter in Dar al-Islam, in the house of Islam. That means in the Ottoman Empire. In this context was emphasized that the clause from the French Imperial Charter protecting the French subjects in the well-protected domains, this is the name of Ottoman territories and seas, Memaliki Mahruse, well-protected domains, was actually said in this text, a characteristic of the legal status of foreigners in Islam, ancak müsteminlik şartı tasdir olunmuş iken. And it's the first time when I found in a document, even legal, even administrative or diplomatic, the term müsteminlik, and not a stipulation specific to the Ottoman-French relations only. You know, there is a formula, friends to friends and enemy to enemies, which is used in Ottoman diplomacy, expressed by this formula, dost ile dost, düşman ile düşman olmak şartı olmayı. And there is another legal opinion where I found this term, Müsteminlik. It's a legal opinion allowing that a Müstemin band, that means a group of foreigners, who makes piracy, plundering the ships of other group of foreigners called Müstemin. So it's allowing, said the Grand Mufti, to be forbidden to come to the Ottoman Empire and be punished. So it was pointed out that it was not about enemy infidels, but a group of foreigners who enter with their ship the well-protected domains as a consequence of the Müsteminlik status. So no name, no proper name is given here, but we know from other sources, as I said, from complementary sources, that it's about English privateers who came and into Mediterranean as merchants, but also as plunderers. You know, Queen Elizabeth I give this right. And the French ambassador, François Savary, complained about this, and he obtained this legal opinion and asked to the Sultan to forbid entering English merchants in the Mediterranean, of course, unsuccessfully. I can avoid to say here that maybe you know better that in the term francs, with its variation francs, firenc, was the oldest concept used in the Mediterranean Black Sea area for defining Europeans, merchants, ship's captains and owners, travelers and adventurers. And we find a lot of formula. An example here I gave, the franc who doesn't pay tribute, haraj guzar or mayan firenc, and was used to designate the infidels from the abode of war who entered the abode of Islam. In this way, they were distinguished from the infidel subjects of the Sultan. That means tribute payers, haraj guzar, zimi. You know, it's about Greeks, Serbs, Bulgarians, even Wallachian and Moldavian, who were considered subjects, non-Muslim subjects of the Sultan. And the Müstemin, the concept of Müstemin was seldom used for foreign merchants in early official documents. That's why I insisted explaining this term. And now, speaking about the documents from administrative section, it's a miscellaneous collection of documents with various chancery forms and authors. I don't know exactly, so I have another couple of minutes, I guess. So first time I want to say about geographical space and historical circumstances. It's about Ottoman Mediterranean after Lepanto. You know, these great battles from 1571. And after this battle, the Christian victory bring a period of equilibrium. Neither Christian nor Ottomans were strong enough to proclaim Mediterranean as Mare Nostrum. And that's why we can say, as other historian, that in Mediterranean, it's about calm waters after Lepanto, which allow to increase the commerce between Western and Eastern Mediterranean. So this is the space of my story, the story told by manuscript. And what I want to say that, because I can show all times this map, but anyway, considering the addresses of the imperial orders to main Mediterranean towns, harbors, and regions mentioned in manuscript are as follows. I made this list but you know, starting with Egypt, with Alexandria, and the Syrian province with Aleppo, but there are also the Barbary with Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, another region, the Straits area with Istanbul and Galata, but also with Gallipoli and Boas fortresses, the Balkan area with Avlonia and certain Aegean island, especially Chios, and the Anatolian region with Antalya, especially. But what I want to emphasize is Alexandria and Aleppo, with more than 30 documents each, were the most important towns for the Western trade in the Levant at late 16th and early 17th century, in this period of time. Smyrna, which is known more, maybe, by specialists as a very important commercial center in Eastern Mediterranean, actually has only one document and must wait the mid-17th century to become the most important port after Istanbul for the Western merchants in the Ottoman domains. Now I want to show some documents connected to, from this administrative section, connected to some important diplomatic achievements of François Savard de Breve, and I start with renewal of ahdname in 1597. So, what do you think? I want to ask you once again how many minutes I have to speak.
If you maybe another 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. So I'm not hard. So. Here, I want to say that in this section, it's copied two important documents which accompany the granting of an ahdname. It's about Grand Vizier report, Telhis, and Sultan's letter of justice. And they are copied in this manuscript. First, it's Telhis, which is the Grand Vizier report, February 1597, and on the articles of capitulations. This is only one folio, it's longer, this document. And this kind of it's a condensed report of the Grand Vizier drawn up for deferred to the Sultan concerning the new articles added to the Imperial charters granted to the King of France in February 1597. And of course, if the Imperial handwriting decree was issued, Sultan ordered this new stipulation be added to the Imperial Charter. It's a usual, it's a practice in the Ottoman court that Grand Vizier to write and send to the Sultan this report, and then the Sultan approve it. And the other documents, it's a letter of justice, adalet-name, February 1597. Both of them are not dated because they are not dated usually, this kind of documents. And this is a document, a circular, if I can say, a document addressed by Sultan Mehmed III to all local authorities, emphasizing the new articles added to the Imperial charters granted to France in February 1597. How to know local authorities about this new stipulation? By this letter of justice, and of course by imperial orders. There are other documents which speak about Western non-treaty merchants, because in the Ottoman Empire came also for trading not only French, English, and Dutch. At that period, only French and English, with and Venetian, with the ambassador, permanent ambassador at Istanbul, and of course with commercial privileges. There is other with no separate invoice, and I have a list here which can be found in the French capitulation from 1569 up to 1604. With Genoese, Portuguese, Catalan, Sicilians, Anconitan, Spaniards, Florentine. And what I want to say that in my manuscript, the most important documents concerning the Western non-treaty merchants, it's Nisan himayun, an imperial monogram, of spring 1598, which speak about the status of the Flemish merchants. They can come and enter for trading into the Ottoman Empire under the protection of France. Was actually a rivalry between France and England, who must protect Flemish merchants during their travel in Ottoman seas and territories. And of course, there is another document here, a French ambassador's petition on the protection of the Dutch merchants around 1600. And speaking about this rivalry dispute between French ambassador and the English ambassador, at that time it was Henry Lello, about on the protection over the Dutch merchants. Of course, why they fought? Because they have also prestige, but also they have financial advantage, because any foreign merchants and Western merchants also must pay a consulage tax of 2% from their merchandise. That's why they wanted to protect them. There is legal opinions of these topics, very interesting, about rivalry between France and England. Two of them are copied in this manuscript, and I publish an articles basing on them. There is another documents concerning consuls, French consuls, rights, privileges, immunities, and obligation in relation with his French co-nationals, in relation with other Western consuls, or in relation with Ottoman local authorities. I have no time to give details, but I can show two documents. There are more, but both of them speaking about status of functions of French consul in Egypt. One was about Jean de Coquerel, March 1599, and other about Gabriel Fournoux in July 1601. And they are longer, these documents, and they speak about, as I said, about their status and functions. Connected to the consuls, it's about the presence of interpreter, terjuman, when a litigation took place between Muslims and foreigners. And this is a hikum addressed by the Sultan to the judge of Galata, speaking of this necessity. That means an interpreter must be present during the trial. And finally, there is more documents concerning setting free French captives, because in his quality of ambassador, François de Breve complained by petition when French subjects were made captives and were not released, despite the stipulation of Imperial Charter on this topic. And here I shall show the most important document copied in this manuscript. It's also a Nisan Sharif, or Nisan Himayun, an imperial monograph, issued in 1598, and which speak about the necessity of setting free the French captives made abusive by local authorities. And in the document, it's emphasized that it's not about North African pirates from Algiers, Tunis, or Tripoli of Libya, but it's about Ottoman authorities who must protect them, but they made piracy with ships and against French ships, invoking various excuses, and enslaved them and confiscated their merchandise. I come to conclusion, and I said that the structure and substance of the manuscript are relevant for the initial intention of Savary de Breve to write a guidebook for the ambassadors and Council of France in the Ottoman Mediterranean. So once again, I want to say that this manuscript illustrates clearly, apparently for the first time in a surviving Ottoman manuscript, the legitimization of clauses from the French capitulation by legal opinions. And finally, I want to say that despite wars, local authorities' abuses, piracy, and enslaving, the Ottoman Mediterranean, especially the eastern part, was mainly a place of trading and intercultural exchange. Actually, despite these abuses, the Western powers want to preserve their commercial privileges in the Ottoman Empire in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, and only the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 put an end to this ex-territoriality status, which is completely didn't fit it with the modern times of 19th century. Thank you for your attention, and I'm waiting if you have questions.
Thank you very much, Viorel. Fascinating insights. It's amazing what you can discover when you analyze such a large collection of documents. If you'd like to stop sharing your screen, and then we can see.
Stop share. Okay.
Yeah. And we're going to take questions now, and I already have a hand raised from James Bone, if you'd like to lead the questions to Professor Panaite.
Thank you, Professor. That was a most interesting talk. I was extremely interested in your explanation of the capitulation, something I've never really understood. And I have a couple of further questions. The first is, in Brexit Britain at the moment, we're doing a lot of negotiating our own capitulations in terms of trade agreements. I wondered, these capitulations that you're talking about, for instance, the renewal of the ahdname you had in 1597, how was that kind of thing negotiated? Was that negotiated by the ambassador? And who was it negotiated with? Or was it just a unilateral act by the Sultan? How did that negotiation take place? And the second question I had was, you made a reference to the capitulations being a system that predated the Ottomans in the Mediterranean and was adopted by the Ottomans as part of the Mediterranean trading system. What are the earliest examples of pre-Ottoman capitulations?
Okay, the first one, even the final text, has a unilateral form. That means there is no other signature than that of the Sultan on the documents. You know, in a modern treaty, you can find at the final two signature. It's not but not any treaty up to 18th century. It's unilateral. But of course, before obtaining a new one, the ambassador discuss, especially, of course, with Grand Vizier about the renewal of capitulation, which is a custom to be renewed. Any documents, diplomatic documents, is a custom in the Ottoman Empire to be renewed when a new sovereign came. When a new sultan came, new treaties, every treaty was renewed. And it happens, I analyze this in my book, Ottoman Law of War and Peace, what happens with Hungary, Venice, Habsburg, and of course with the and it's a custom and was respected by Ottoman in relation with Western powers. As I said, for 17th century, sometime everybody who wrote about, even me, before I found that documents sold, you know, that but in 19th century, everybody say that after 1604 and up to 1673, the other French capitulation, at the end of, or in the second part of 17th century, no capitulation was granted. It's false, because actually they were granted, and when a new sultan or a new king came to the throne. And the second one was
about pre-Ottoman capitulations. You said that it was something that it pre-existed the Ottomans.
If you read, I shall show this book. You see, was written by Malatri. It's about Traité de Paix et de Commerce. That means the treaties of peace and commerce avec with les Arabes from North Africa. That means these are the first commercial privileges between Christian and Muslim. But of course, this kind of commercial privileges was practiced by Byzantines, for instance. Actually, Venetian obtained from Byzantine, and this tradition was transmitted. And what I want to emphasize in my book, in my next book, I want to say that custom was more important than written text in Mediterranean for establishing the status of merchants. And the sea laws and lex mercatoria, or merchant law, prove this. And there are common points between Islamic law and European law, which can be astonished, especially when we see Muslims or West European specialists who wants to see only what separate Islam and Christianity. Okay, I hope that I answered.
Thank you very much. Indeed, that was really, really interesting. First of all, I've never seen the Mehmet III's engraving, that particular engraving that you showed us before. I know that there was a painting of him by an Italian, and it looks like, and there is an engraving, the older age engraving, but this is much younger. It looks like some engraving is done based on that painting, but I don't know what it is. Whose Mehmet III's mother was a Venetian woman who was a slave herself, who was hijacked by the Ottoman pirates, by the way. So it's interesting that these capitulations are banning the piracy in Mediterranean. But I wondered in those texts how they refer foreigners, how they foreigners refer them, the Christians and Muslims. I mean, how did they define each other?
I didn't understand well how
in the text, in the fatwas and in the ahdnames, how the Frank was described as Frank, and then Frank described them as Turks, Muslims. How did they define each other?
So the term used in legal text, but also in chronicle or in other documents, Ottoman documents, it's kafir. It's direct.
Yeah. Okay.
It's translated infidel, unbeliever.
It's Christian, yeah.
Yeah, but
unbeliever, yes.
There is an in Turkish there is another which came in Vulgata, gavur, which enter in all Balkanic language. In my language, it's gavur, but also it's in Bulgarian. So it's infidels, and of course there are two kinds of infidels. As I said, it's infidels who inhabited house of war, like French, everybody outside the Ottoman, the House of Islam, that means the Ottoman Empire, and was They were called in other documents Frank and or Firenk, and of course the other infidels inside the empire, which was canonically called Zimmi, which means protected non-Muslims. Zimmi was, you know, everybody who entered in, who accepted to be subject of Caliph or then to the Sultan, paying a tax, jizya, which is a poll tax, capitation. And this is the big differences between subjects and foreigners and subjects of the Sultan, even if both are infidels. And believe me, Turkish knew very well how to make these differences. And I want to say that the term Muslimin, which usually by scholars say that it's used only in the 18th century, I prove with these documents that actually it's used at end 16 in documents and were very well defined in Ottoman milieu.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting.
Thank you also.
Excellent. Georgina Watson.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed your talk. I have a question in regard to perhaps Ottoman-centric perspectives within traditional Western meta-narratives of European-Ottoman interaction. Could we use manuscript 130 to emphasize Ottoman perspectives of trans-Mediterranean trade within this? Because I've been reading Giovanni Ricci's Appeal to the Turk, which is very much a Western perspective of this. But De Brave seems to take on the Ottoman side more, for all he's a French ambassador. So does that work for pro-Ottoman perspectives, or does it strengthen the Western perspective, if that makes sense?
If I understood, and if I understood well, because you have a specific British accent, no?
I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I have my limitation for English, but anyway, I understand. These documents are not issued by any chancellor that Ottoman. This is the Ottoman point of view, Islamic Ottoman. And of course, it's not about to be pro or contra, or pro or no against, because it's what I want to say. It illustrates theory and practice, diplomatic, legal, and abuse what happens in Mediterranean. De Breve wrote other things. I know 4 discourse speeches in French, where he exposed his opinion about the relation with the Ottoman Porte. And of course, he was a diplomat. There are I want to emphasize that this discours en français are written for the French kings. So one of them, for instance, proved the necessity of keeping the alliance with the Ottoman Empire. But there is another discourse speaking where the François de Breve said, no, we must fight against the Ottoman Empire and for destroying. And this is discourse, you know, it's a tradition in the 17th century with this perspective to fight against. And he wrote even a kind of discourse. And there is another discourse written by him, an autobiography, a long autobiography, where he said what he did at the Ottoman Empire when he was ambassador. Of course, you know, as everybody say, I did the best. But comparing the sources and using complementary sources, we realize that actually it happens very much in terms of French-Ottoman relations in this period of time. And that's why I get courage to compose and the puzzle of that period. I was clear in my explanation or not?
Yes, that was perfect. So we can use this example to connect the Mediterranean as opposed to just comparing each side almost.
Yeah. Anyway, there are a lot of, as complementary sources in this period, there are a lot of travelers, Western travelers. I use, for instance, in my, there are English traveler in this period of time. It's, what can I say? Is John Sanderson, one of them, who was also merchants and diplomat, Lithgow one, and other, George Sandys. And of course, there are French travelers. There are pilgrims, Italian pilgrims who came and wrote about their travelers, their voyages. And of course, using also their information, we can obtain a very objective image of what happens in Mediterranean in 20 years, maximum 20 years of history, which is very challenging, but I must know everything. Usually I wrote on long-term period from 15th to 18th century about what status of tributaries, about Ottoman law of peace. But now my challenge is to write a history only for maximum 20 years of what happened in Mediterranean. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay, I've got one, if I may. So when a sovereign died, and each time the capitulation would be renegotiated. Now, am I right in thinking that there would be a renegotiation and this would take time, rather than just taking the old capitulation and putting in the new sovereign's name? So that was one question. The other question is, if it did take time to renegotiate a capitulation, is there any evidence from the manuscript that these were times of instability and conflict between the merchants and local officials?
A new renegotiation means to introduce in the text of capitulation of new stipulations. And usually a new stipulation appear when old customs were unrespected, were broken, no, by in practice by local authorities' abuses. For instance, in 1597 and 1604 ahdname renewed during the François times, there are many new clauses, new articles speaking about what happened during their navigation in the Mediterranean. I have no time to show you the legal opinion concerning commercial navigation. That means what happens with these abuses. And there are clauses included because this is the logic of capitulation, to include what was not respected. They don't discuss what, you see, what we must write in this capitulation. No, they see what in practice happened, and it's written there. Okay, there are Ottoman captains, reis, who attack, pillage, and confiscated merchandise when during the travel of French ships and merchants. Yes, there are. So we must write, don't happen this. And in this, in François at the time, the capitulation became longer, much longer than that of the last one, 1581, no, before 1597. And the second question was about, once again,
well, it was just whether there was evidence that when there was a change of sovereign and a capitulation was rewritten between the two sovereigns, whether that was a time where the Ottoman Rais would take the opportunity to attack Western merchants, or the other way around.
No, because I say once again, custom is more important than written text. Up to show this is my ahdname respected, you know, people want to respect these habits, these practices. And of course, the abuses exist even with the written text, without written text. But usually they are, there are other kind of, there are hukums, that means imperial orders, who was sent every month. I have a lot in my manuscript to the local official, imposing them to respect stipulations. And even there is a delay, and sometimes there is a long delay between up to a new a renewal of new capitulation, but doesn't mean that the rules are not, the status of foreigners are not respected. It happens, for instance, in I remember now in 18th century when a Russian-Turkish war started. It's written in their peace treaty that in Moldavia, for instance, leave the Russian merchants to allow Russian merchants to leave the country without robbing, without enslaving them. And it happens, but especially between, you know, the states at the boundaries, where the conflicts are very strong and permanent, between Habsburg and Ottoman, between Russian and Ottoman.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, I think we'll end it there, but thank you very much for this fascinating insight into the manuscript. Probably, I suspect, lots more information there and in related documents. When do you hope to write your or finish your book?
I am at the end of this. I wait too much. Of course, I have around 10 articles published in English about almost every topic I speak about consuls, about piracy, English on North African, about Western diplomacy, but to compose all in a book, to put in the same covers are a little more, or vision must be a little different. But I am sure that in next year or this year I shall finish this book, because I must finish with this research.
Okay, well, I hope you'll let us know when it's published. We'd be very pleased to put a little review in our newsletter, and maybe that will be an opportunity to meet again. So on behalf of everybody, can I just thank you for your talk?
Thank you once again for your attention.
Very much appreciated. And you know, we hope to see you again very soon. Thank you everybody for coming. We'll see you soon as well, I hope. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.